We convened a group of about a dozen people, people who are skilled in mythology, cosmology, physics, psychology, and so on. And we discussed, is the sun conscious? Well, of course, none of us knew, but we thought it was interesting to talk about. The first day we discussed, you know, could you prove it's conscious, or what would it mean for the sun to be conscious? And then the second day we moved on to the question, assuming the sun's conscious, what does it think about? So all traditional cultures have taken it for granted that the sun is alive and that it's conscious. It's a god or a goddess. For the Greeks, Apollo; for the Hindus, Surya; for the Japanese, a goddess; and in Northern European mythology, a goddess as well. So the gender of the sun fluctuates, the mythologies fluctuate, but all these cultures have taken it for granted that the sun is alive and conscious and intelligent, because goddesses and gods are conscious. That, of course, is dismissed in modern science as a childish, animistic fantasy. And the fact that children think the sun's conscious too simply adds weight to that dismissal. In the Middle Ages, here in Europe, the general assumption was that the universe was alive, the whole universe was a living being, animals and plants were truly alive, they had souls. Aristotle's theory of plants was that each is shaped by its soul. The soul gives form to the body of the plant. Animals have, in addition, souls that underlie their sensitivity and movement. That's why they're called animals, from the Latin word anima, meaning soul. And humans have plant-like souls that shape their bodies, animal-like souls that give the instincts and coordinate sensations and movements, and in addition, the rational soul. Now, after the 17th century revolution, the whole of nature became mechanical. The whole universe was a machine made of non-conscious matter. Descartes defined matter as non-conscious and separated off consciousness into a realm of spirit, which was not in space or time. There were only three categories of conscious things in Descartes' universe: God, angels, and human minds. The rest of nature, all the stars, all the heavenly bodies, everything on earth, all animals and plants, was mechanical, made of unconscious matter. And plants and animals were just machines, and the human body was just a machine. This is the worldview that we still have and is still dominant within science, the mechanistic model of the universe. One of the biggest crises is the existence of human consciousness. Because until the 19th century, most scientists were content to live in a dualistic universe. Science dealt with matter, which is non-conscious. Religion dealt with consciousness, God, angels, and human minds, especially morality. But in the 19th century, growing numbers of people didn't like this dualism. They thought having two principles was too many. We should just have one. One school of thought said, well, it's all mind or consciousness, and that's the idealist school in philosophy, which was very influential in the early 19th century. But the school that became predominant as the 19th century wore on, especially within science, was materialism. Materialism takes Cartesian dualism, this twofold model, and says there's no such thing as spirit. God and angels simply don't exist, and human minds are nothing but the activity of human brains. It's all material, and it's all basically non-conscious. There are a whole lot of other questions arise as soon as we begin to think about this. How is it that the sun knows what's going on in the solar system? What's actually the basis of its knowledge, and does it have organs of perception? It's generally taken for granted in traditional societies that the sun knows what's happening on Earth. And the sun is usually portrayed as having an eye, the eye of Horus in Egyptian mythology, for example. And the idea that the sun is an eye is a commonplace in many cultures. In Malay, for example, the word for sun is matahari, which means the eye of the day. And we have the very same concept in the name of the flower, the daisy. The daisy looks like a sun with the central yellow bit and the petals coming off from it. And daisy is short for day's eye. That's what daisy means. It's a kind of model of the sun or an image of the sun. So how would the sun know what's going on within the solar system? Well, one way would be through the electromagnetic field. The electromagnetic field on the Earth, which we're all part of now, it includes all the radio waves in this room, all the things going on inside our brains, electrical changes, everything that's happening on Earth is within the Earth's magnetic field, and that's within the magnetic field of the sun. It's possible that the sun can directly know what's happening through the electromagnetic field. That may be the interface, its sense organ. This recalls an idea of Isaac Newton's, one of his most interesting ideas, in my view, when Newton was trying to think about the nature of gravity. He couldn't work out how matter could attract other matter across empty space. And in fact, he came up with the idea that empty space wasn't just a kind of blank, neutral container. It was, as he put it, the sensorium, the sense organ of God. He thought absolute space was God's sense organ. God is omnipotent and omniscient, knows everything. How does God know everything? Most people who believe in God, I believe in God myself, you take it for granted there's a kind of divine omniscience, but Newton was one of the very few people who thought about how it might work. And he thought one way it worked was through the gravitational, the gravitation and absolute space were closely linked. God's sense organ was absolute space, therefore he knew where everything was, how fast it was moving, and where the entire contents of the whole universe at any given time. And through this space, Newton thought that God actually directly powered gravitation itself. Now we're in this new situation. Everything's up for grabs at the moment. Panpsychism is a philosophy which is becoming more widely discussed. And when it's more widely discussed, we realize that actually the idea of panpsychism is not a new one. It used to be called animism, the idea that there's life and some kind of soul in all nature. In the 17th century, in reaction against Descartes, there were two prominent European philosophers who argued in favor of panpsychism or animism. One was Leibniz, who often got into disputes with Isaac Newton. Leibniz said that nature is made up of a whole series of self-organizing units, which he called monads. And each of these has a body and also a mind, and each reflects the universe from its own point of view. So the whole universe is full of centers of awareness or consciousness, which are all reflecting each other. An interesting philosophy. The other one was Spinoza, the Dutch Jewish philosopher, who argued that nature and God were the same. He was a pantheist, that God is nature, nature is God. God is the consciousness of nature. Nature is the body of God. Well, the most interesting 20th century panpsychist philosopher was Alfred North Whitehead, who took the view that the entire universe is an organism, that nature is made up of organisms, not of machines. And he wanted to shift the whole paradigm of science towards organism rather than machine. That, in a sense, is, again, going back at a higher turn of the spiral to a kind of animist or panpsychist view of nature. What makes Whitehead particularly interesting from the point of view of this discussion is that he pointed a way to a new understanding of consciousness. And we need some kind of understanding of consciousness if we're going to ask the question, is the sun conscious? What do we mean by consciousness? Whitehead was one of the few philosophers who actually understood quantum theory as soon as it happened in the 1920s. He was a mathematician. He worked with Bertrand Russell on a great work called Principia Mathematica. He knew a lot of maths. He produced an alternative relativity theory to Einstein's, which made rather different predictions, which may indeed have been more correct. But he very quickly appreciated the importance of quantum theory. Quantum theory tells us that matter, the basis of materialism, is not made up of bits of enduring stuff like tiny billiard balls. Matter's made up of wave-like vibrations. Light is made of quanta of light. An electron is a wave-like vibration. It's a wave vibratory activity in an electron field, in quantum field, matter fields. A proton is a vibration in a proton field. Because matter is made of waves, Whitehead pointed out, it's not stuff, it's a process. Waves take time to wave. You can't have a wave at an instant.
Récapitulons le mouvement qui créerait à chaque instant notre réalité. Le présent pôle, ce qui se passe à chaque instant, ce serait ce que l'on appelle la décohérence quantique. La décohérence quantique, c'est quand un objet quantique peut être partout à la fois, c'est-à-dire qu'il est un petit multivers à lui tout seul, et que pourtant une seule réalité se manifeste. L'observateur jouerait un rôle de choix de cette décohérence. Mais en a-t-il toujours conscience? Et est-ce un choix? Qu'est-ce qui préside à ce choix, c'est-à-dire l'effondrement du paquet d'ondes présentes dans l'invisible, et dont une seule possibilité sera finalement actualisée dans le monde visible? Quels sont les agents qui sélectionnent telle ou telle possibilité? Ceci est probablement l'une des questions les plus importantes des années à venir, mais nous avons des pistes. Ainsi, selon Roger Penrose, prix Nobel 2020, c'est la conscience qui fait le travail de faire passer du multiple à l'unique. C'est elle qui réduit les états quantiques présentes dans l'invisible et qui fait rentrer les infos du vide quantique, qu'il appelle champ quanto-gravitationnel, dans notre réalité manifestée via une décharge neuronale.
So waves have to be spread out in time and also in space. And that's why, fundamentally, quantum theory has the uncertainty principle. You can't define a wave at an instant. So Whitehead pointed this out very clearly. He also pointed out that if matter's made of waves, and waves are processes, everything in matter has a past and a future. It's a process in time, polarized in time between past and future. And he then argued that this provided a clue for understanding the relation of mind and body. All of us have grown up with the familiar cliche that the mind is somehow the inner life. We talk about our inner life, and the body is sort of outer, the mind somehow within. It's a spatial metaphor, the inner life and the outer world, and so on. Whitehead thought we'd never solve the mind-body problem that way, understand how mind and body are related. And nobody does understand how they're related. So he was right that this metaphor hasn't taken us far. What he argued is that the relation between body and mind is best understood as a polarity in time, not in space. The mind is the future pole, and the body, or the physical material aspect, is the past pole. So, for example, if you're looking at an electron, the Schrödinger wave equation describes all the things that the electron could do, all the possible things it could do, possibilities. But as soon as it interacts with something or is measured by a physicist, these possibilities collapse down to a definable interaction, which you can actually, like a silver grain on a photographic plate, a measurable, or something in a cloud chamber, you can actually measure a physical thing, but that's in the past. And now a new wave of possibilities start opening up. And the point about the mental pole, the future pole, is that it consists of possibilities. Possibilities are not physical facts. They're not yet physical facts. They only become physical facts when one of them is realized, actualized. Before that, they exist in a realm which is not the normal physical realm. It's a kind of virtual realm, and that, he thought, was the realm of the mental pole or of consciousness.
Philippe Guillemant dit « Notre structure quadridimensionnelle, ce que nous percevons avec nos yeux physiques, serait plongée dans un champ beaucoup plus vaste, un vide non vide, probablement décadimensionnel, rempli d'informations à la hauteur de 10 puissance 120. Cet espace serait incommensurablement plus dense en informations que la réalité perçue, c'est-à-dire le tunnel ou bien la caverne, selon le point de vue où l'on se place. C'est dans cet espace incommensurable, infini, que se trouve notamment la matière noire, toujours très mystérieuse aujourd'hui. Mais aussi peut-être d'autres dimensions, d'autres univers multiples, parallèles, gigognes. Le présent pôle, ce qui se passe à chaque instant, ce serait ce que l'on appelle la décohérence quantique. La décohérence quantique, c'est quand un objet quantique peut être partout à la fois, c'est-à-dire qu'il est un petit multivers à lui tout seul, et que pourtant une seule réalité se manifeste. L'observateur jouerait un rôle de choix de cette décohérence. Mais en a-t-il toujours conscience? Et est-ce un choix? Qu'est-ce qui préside à ce choix, c'est-à-dire l'effondrement du paquet d'ondes présentes dans l'invisible, et dont une seule possibilité sera finalement actualisée dans le monde visible? Quels sont les agents qui sélectionnent telle ou telle possibilité? Ceci est probablement l'une des questions les plus importantes des années à venir, mais nous avons des pistes. Ainsi, selon Roger Penrose, prix Nobel 2020, c'est la conscience qui fait le travail de faire passer du multiple à l'unique. C'est elle qui réduit les états quantiques présentes dans l'invisible et qui fait rentrer les infos du vide quantique, qu'il appelle champ quanto-gravitationnel, dans notre réalité manifestée via une décharge neuronale.
How would the sun remember, or how would a galaxy remember, or how would a cosmos remember? We're used to the idea that memory depends on traces in the brain, memory traces that are supposed to be in synaptic endings or in molecules. As I show in my book, The Science Delusion, the idea that memories are stored in the brain is one of the 10 dogmas of science. There's very little evidence for it. It's simply taken for granted by most people because it just seems like common sense. But it's surprisingly difficult to show this, and people have been trying in science over 100 years to do this and failed over and over again. And I think the reason they've failed is that memories are not stored inside the brain. I think the brain is more like a TV receiver than a video recorder, and it tunes in to influences from its own past states, which travel by the process I call Morphic Resonance, the influence of like upon like within self-organizing systems across space and time from the past to the present. I don't have time to explain this whole morphic resonance hypothesis now. Some of you are familiar with it, probably some of you are not familiar with it.
Ces champs seraient des sortes de mémoires à l'extérieur du cerveau dans lesquelles nous puiserions, le plus souvent inconsciemment, des informations pour mener notre existence. Dans lequel nous puiserions, le plus souvent inconsciemment, pour mener notre existence sur un plan psychique, physique, etc. Ce sont des sortes de mémoires collectives, donc, que chacun d'entre nous nourrit. Je vais vous lire un passage de son ouvrage qui s'appelle « Réenchanter la science ». Ma propre hypothèse est que la formation d'habitude répond à un processus appelé résonance morphique. Des formes d'activité entrent en résonance à travers l'espace et le temps avec les formes similaires précédentes. Cette hypothèse s'applique à tous les systèmes auto-organisés tels que les atomes, les molécules, les cristaux, les cellules, les plantes, les animaux, les sociétés animales. Tous tirent parti de la mémoire collective et y contribuent à leur tour. Un cristal de sulfate de cuivre, par exemple, entre en se formant en résonance avec les innombrables cristaux de sulfate de cuivre qui l'ont précédé et adopte les mêmes habitudes d'organisation cristalline, la même structure en treillis. Une pousse de chêne suit les habitudes de croissance et de développement des chênes précédents. Quand l'araignée commence à tisser sa toile, elle suit les habitudes d'innombrables ancêtres avec qui elle entre en résonance à travers l'espace et le temps. Plus il y a de gens qui apprennent un nouveau savoir-faire, tel que le snowboard, plus il sera facile aux autres de l'apprendre, à cause de la fameuse résonance morphique issue des pratiquants précédents. En résumé, cette hypothèse propose les idées suivantes. 1. Les systèmes auto-organisés tels que les molécules, cellules, tissus, organes, organismes, sociétés et esprits sont faits de hiérarchies imbriquées ou holarchies de hauts-longs ou unités morphiques. À chaque niveau d'organisation, le tout est davantage que la somme des parties et ces parties sont elles-mêmes des tout faits de parties. 2. La cohérence de chaque niveau dépend du champ organisateur appelé champ morphique. Ce champ se trouve dans et autour du système qui l'organise et constitue un modèle vibratoire d'activité qui interagit avec les champs électromagnétiques quantiques du système. Je fais une pause dans ma citation. Vous remarquerez ici que Sheldrake suppose que les informations soient autour du système. Vous comprendrez plus tard en quoi cette proposition semble extrêmement juste. Je continue. Le terme générique de champ morphique inclut des champs morphogénétiques qui donnent forme à la croissance des plantes et des animaux, des champs comportementaux et perceptifs qui organisent les mouvements, les formes fixes d'action et les instincts des animaux, des champs sociaux qui relient et coordonnent les comportements des groupes sociaux, des champs mentaux qui sous-tendent les activités mentales et forment les habitudes de pensée. Fin de la citation.
But in essence, it's the idea there's a kind of memory in all nature. The whole universe has a kind of memory. The laws of nature are more like habits that evolve along with the evolving universe. And all self-organizing systems have a collective memory. Each animal species draws on a collective memory of its kind. And individuals have their own individual memory because they're more similar to themselves in the past than to anything else. Each one of us is more similar to ourselves in the past, which is why we have our own memories. But we're similar to other people to varying degrees, which is why we tune into a kind of collective memory as well. The difference between individual and collective memory is one of degree, not of kind.